Nigeria's President, Bola Tinubu, is seeking to restore constitutional order in Niger following a coup in July. In his address to the United Nations General Assembly in New York, Tinubu criticized military coups that have swept through West Africa. The regional bloc ECOWAS has activated a so-called standby force for potential military intervention in Niger if diplomatic efforts fail. That decision has raised fears of an escalation that could further destabilize the Sahel region.
Nations regarding Niger, we are negotiating with the military leaders. As chairman of ECOWAS, I seek to help establish democratic governance in a manner that addresses the political economy challenges confronting that nation, including violent extremists who seek to foment instability in our region. I extend a hand of friendship to all of you who may genuinely support this mission for a democratic governance in that nation. Military coups are wrong. As in any titled civilian political arrangement that is, will perpetuate injustice. The wave-crossing part of Africa does not demonstrate favor towards coup. It is a demand for solution to perennial problem. Let us dig it deeper. An outright exploitation from abroad have also exerted a heavy toll on our ability to progress. Given this long history, if this year's theme is to mean anything at all, it must mean something special and particular to Africa. In the aftermath of the Second World War, nations gathered in an attempt to rebuild their war-torn societies. A new global system was born, and this great body, the United Nations, was established as a symbol and protector of the aspiration and the finest ideas of humankind. Nations saw that it was in their own interest to help others exceed the rubbles and wasteland of war. Reliable and significant assistance allowed countries emaciated by war to grow into a strong and productive society. The period was a high water mark for trust in global institutions and the belief that humanity had learned the necessary lessons to move forward in global solidarity and harmony. Today, for several decades, Africa has been asking for the same level of political commitment and devotion of resource that described the Marshall Plan.
All right, the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria and, of course, Chair of ECOWAS there giving his speech at Onga. Rufai.
So, President Tinubu had his day in the sun yesterday. He's gone in history as many other Nigerian leaders to address the world at the United Nations General Assembly. And he gave a speech, about 46 paragraphs, and he said a lot. But some parts I'm going to pick on. Let's start from the last part. He talked about the need for a Marshall Plan. And I'll tell you, historically, after the Second World War, the reason why America put about $14 billion in a Marshall Plan, and the plan was called the Marshall Plan because it was led by somebody called Marshall, in a Marshall Plan for reconstruction of Europe, was because America had interests. It wasn't just dash money. In Germany, for instance, if you remember that the Allied forces had divided areas of Germany, sectors of Germany, into various interest camps for the Allied forces. America had most parts of Berlin. And you know that further led to the disintegration of Germany across two lines, where the Soviets held onto the eastern part and the western part of Germany, capitalism. And that was across ideology. So America put that money in the Marshall Plan because of their own interest and being able to dominate Europe. And it worked for them. And that's why the world order tilted towards America after the war. So if Africa needs a Marshall Plan, trade should be Africa's Marshall Plan. We cannot wait for any handout from the West. And I'm excited he talked about the fact that I want to trade with the West.
Yes.
And please, it is not because the West loves you, that's when they're going to come trade with you. It is what is in it for them. And that's why you have a trade bargain, trade agreement, trade surplus, and trade deficit between nations. He talked about the fact that coups are wrong. Yes, nobody supports coups. But also the civilians must understand that they must do well by the people. There are a bunch of hypocritical African leaders that will speak there today. I'm sure the likes of the Ivory Coast president will come out and say coups are wrong. But when he's been extending the constitution to favor himself, the reason why the president of Ivory Coast has not left the position is because the people that he thought we would put in power would take over for him died. Koulibaly died. That's why. So when African leaders turn their country into their own personal backyard, then they should also understand that in order to prevent military coups, we must prevent civilian coups. Also, moving further, he talked about trade, he talked about climate change. I also want to see more expansive engagement as regards climate change, because it can also be used to be able to harness resources by saving the environment first, and also in return, helping to save our society and also generating revenue. We can see the Gabon model. He talked about the fact that Africa should not be pity. Yes, Africa should not be pity. And we should start changing these dynamics of aid and let's looking forward to trade. He hit the right chords in the 46 paragraphs of the speech. All we can only say is, let us get to work.
Get to work.
Okay. In terms of style, content, and tone, it's a very well-written speech. Not one of those copy and paste copies, that we used to get from the Federal Ministry of Foreign Affairs in recent times. So very well-written. And that speech also is Afrocentric. He didn't go, to the United Nations General Assembly to talk about himself. He talked about Africa. In fact, his first paragraph said, look, part of the problems we have in Africa is because the rest of the world has failed Africa. And if we must achieve the 2030 agenda, which is about the Sustainable Development Goals, 17 goals, 169 targets, then Africa must be a priority for the world. Now, yes, his first address at the United Nations General Assembly, as we've been told, but he made a point there that, look, the Marshall Plan that he was referring to, which, was in the context of the creation of the United Nations, we must clarify it. He said very clearly that that is not what Africa is asking for. Africa is asking for partnership and cooperation that can help Africa to achieve the 2030 SDGs. In any case, that's the theme of this year's Hunger 78, as it is otherwise known. We're a very lengthy theme, but it places emphasis on the 2030 agenda on peace, prosperity, partnership, and progress, and the sustainability of all. So what the president did in his speech was to link that to Africa. And he said if we have partnership and cooperation from the rest of the world, we'll be able to achieve a number of things. Creation of jobs. He said, I will highlight 5 issues. Creation of jobs, private actors supporting businesses in Africa and investment, leadership by example, reforms in Nigeria. He referred to that, the removal of fuel subsidy. He talked about the harmonization of the foreign exchange regime. And he said all of this, has been done in Nigeria to drive investment in that direction. Then he talked about military coups. He said military coups are wrong. Okay, he said military coups are wrong. And it was in that context that he talked about the situation in Niger. And he was asking the international community to support ECOWAS in his capacity as ECOWAS chairman to make sure, that situation in Niger is addressed. But one omission in that regard, in my view, although in the previous paragraph 14, he had talked about leadership by example. When he got to the paragraph of military coups, he didn't talk about sit-tight leaders. I thought he was going to go a step further and talk about sit-tight leaders in Africa and how chronism is also a major problem. He addressed the issue of violent extremism, particularly in the Sahel region. And he was hoping that the rest of the world would support Africa by checking the proliferation of arms, because it's these Western powers that provide the weapons that are used to promote violent extremism in Africa. Then he moved on very quickly to the pillage of African resources in the DRC, in other parts of Africa, even in Nigeria, where all these multinationals just come to Africa to come and steal, our resources. And he thought that the international community has a moral burden to make sure that that does not continue. Then he delved into the subject of climate change. And he was also calling for the support of the international community, citing desert encroachment in Nigeria, the crisis in Morocco, and also in Libya. So it was just an appeal to the rest of the world to partner with Africa and to make a priority. And he made a point, not as in the olden days when Africa will still be shackled. And generally, that speech has a lot of sound bites. So whoever wrote it was, was paying enough attention to sound bites. And it's partly on the basis of that I said, it was a well-delivered speech. However, the subtext of all of this is that the international community, would they listen? Take, for example, in the UK, Rishi Sunak, Prime Minister, is going to give an address on Friday in which he's going to basically roll back on the net zero pledges by the United Kingdom. Well, some commentators have said this is going to cause a major division between Labour and the Conservatives and will be a major issue in the next election. But it's not only Prime Minister Rishi Sunak that is alone in this regard. So they go to all these events, COP27, COP28, G20. They make promises about climate change, about, reduction of fossil fuels, but are they really committed? So President Tinubu may well be preaching to a hypocritical audience, but it is good at least that he has put that on record during his first outing. And he was looking quite healthy and fresh. It looks like something has been further introduced in Aso Rock that makes people, that rejuvenates presidential, appearance. But it's okay. Good outing so far, so good.
Yes, I must say good outing so far. It's the 70th edition of On-Gand. Arise News has been covering, giving you updates, a number of highlights already. Beyond the president's speech, we also had the president of Ukraine, Zelensky, speaking as well, and that was also quite looked forward to. But of course, our concern is with, and our major focus is on that speech by the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. A number of Nigerians looking forward to hearing how he would represent on the world stage. I mean, ONGA has most of the world leaders in attendance, and many of them, just representing their countries. And President Tinubu didn't, in this regard, fail Nigerians in terms of how he projected and the quality of speech that he gave in the early hours of this morning, actually, late last night into early hours of this morning, obviously because of the time difference between Nigeria and New York. But the highlights have already been stated, but one or two things I'd like to just center on. One of it is when he spoke about business and trade between Africa and Nigeria in particular and the West. He said Nigeria is open for business. The question is not how much of the world is open, truly open to doing business with Nigeria and Africa in an equal, mutually beneficial manner. And I have to emphasize that word, equal, mutually beneficial manner, which is what an international trade should be in terms of a mutually benefiting agreement. And also, Nigeria standing on equal footing as much as possible with its trade partners internationally. And so when we talk about that in Africa, beyond the rhetoric, beyond saying this, Africa itself must position its position as a continent that is able to stand, foot by foot with its international partners. In recent times, we had, occasion to criticize or perhaps analyze this Africa-UK summit, French-Africa summit, where it almost seems as if countries on this continent are going, cap in hand, going abroad for an investment summit that has Africa at the center of its conversation. So beyond having or giving talks like this, is also seeing how we can introduce and welcome the international community to have such summits here on the continent of Africa. Equal standing. And then when it comes to trade as well, we cannot overemphasize this enabling environment for business. Just recently, Dr. Jumoke Oduwole is coming back as SA to the president on PEBEC, ease of doing business and investment. And I think that's quite critical. There are some strides, significant strides actually, that were made in the last administration. And I'm hoping that this government will consolidate on that and build on that. It's not enough, as we often say here, to promise that Africa is ready to trade and do business with the international world if we don't position ourselves and the rule of law. He talked about foreign exchange, removal of fuel subsidy, the economic climate, investment opportunities for the world to actually see Nigeria as the destination of choice. Well, we'll move on to our next story. Nigeria's two main opposition leaders have filed separate appeals at the Supreme Court, challenging a tribunal ruling that upheld President Bola Tinubu's victory in the 2023 presidential election. Arise correspondent Godfrey Eshemoge reports.
The People's Democratic Party and its candidate Atiku Abubakar, alongside the Labour Party and its candidate Peter Obi, are leaving nothing to chance as they have worked hard to meet the 14-day deadline to appeal the judgment of the Presidential Election Petition Court at the Supreme Court. Atiku and the PDP, in the notice of appeal, predicated on 35 grounds, insists that the election court, in the judgment delivered by Justice Haruna Tamani, committed a miscarriage of justice by dismissing the petition challenging the declaration of Tinubu as president by the Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC. The notice of appeal filed by Atiku's lead counsel, Chris Uche, is praying the Supreme Court to set aside the whole findings and conclusion of the tribunal on the grounds that they did not represent the true picture of the grounds of his petition. Meanwhile, Peter Obi of the Labour Party, in his appeal, approached the Apex Court on 51 grounds, which he termed an error in law to prove that President Bola Tinubu did not win the election and that it was wrong for both INEC and the PEPC to declare him winner of the election. On the issue of the 25% requirement for Abuja, Obi and the Labour Party listed the particulars of error, stating that the PEPC failed to appreciate that for the president to assume the office, he is under a mandate to secure 25% of the votes cast in the FCT. No date has been fixed to hear both petitions. Godfrey Eshemoge, Arise News.
Thank you very much, Godfrey, for that detailed report. Rufai.
So it's clear they've put out their grounds where they feel the court erred across borders. The major issues, the 25%, cases about their weaknesses, cases about how the election was done, use of IREV. Maybe they are saying that it should be that the law talks about using it for collation of results. They also talked about their weaknesses, and that also goes to case about the Evidence Act, which would get more clarity. They talked about the Abuja conundrum, the 25% need in Abuja to be able to emerge as president, that the appeal court here, Presidential Tribunal Court, had ruled against before now. So it's still pretty much the slant of most of this issue. So we will just pretty much wait for the court. Obi filed across 51 grounds. Atiku Abubakar about 35 grounds. Atiku Abubakar also said, that he wanted a rerun in the filing in his prayers. That this probably will be between him and Bola Ahmed Tinubu. So let's just wait and see how all of this pans out. They have a right of reply to what the court has said, and they've exercised the right.
All right.
Okay, on September 6th, that was when the Court of Appeals, sitting as the Presidential Election Petition Tribunal, gave its ruling. Within the purview of the law, the petitioners had 14 days to appeal. What the Court of Appeal did on September 6th was to say, look, Bola Ahmed Tinubu and his Vice President, Shetima, they are fit and proper, duly elected persons as President and Vice President of Nigeria, and that the petitioners failed to prove their matters. And on INEC, they said INEC, had passed the test of substantial compliance. Now, the petitioners had 14 days to file an appeal to the Apex Court, and that's what they have done. Today will be the last day, but both parties had done so by September 18. What is next? We expect the CJN, the Chief Justice of Nigeria, to set up a panel that will now look at the matter. And it is for the court to look at the notices of appeal that have been filed. From the Labour Party and Mr. P2B, 51 grounds of appeal, detailed, put out in terms of errors, what they call errors of law, and the particulars of those errors, and then their prayers. Now, what is the main prayer of the P2B Labour Party? That Mr. P2B should be declared president, because the presidential election petition, tribunal erred in law on all the 51 grounds that they pointed out. What are the main issues? They said their witnesses were wrongly dismissed. 2, that the court, was wrong to have asked them to provide particulars of the figures by which they claimed, originally that Tinubu's figures were inflated, and that also, issues about electronic transmission, and then asking them to cite the polling units where irregularities occurred. The 35 prayers by Atiku Abubakar and the People's Democratic Party are also in a sense similar, except that here, Chris Uche, who is the lead counsel for the PDP and Atiku Abubakar, is saying, look, on the basis of the doctrine of legitimate expectation, the court heard in saying that, INEC did not, it was not mandatory for INEC to do electronic transmission. INEC having promised to do so. Second, they also picked issues with the 25%, with the petitioners, with the appellants, now saying that, look, section 134, sub 2, sub B, should be read conjunctively, not disjunctively, contrary to the claim of the court. They also picked issues with the dismissal of 13 of their witnesses, and then they said, the PEPC also erred in law, that's the expression, when they failed to nullify the election. So basically, in terms of prayers or the alternatives, in that notice of appeal, the PDP and Atiku Abubakar are saying that the election, should be annulled. 2, that there should be a rerun. And 3, that Tinubu did not win. But basically, they are basing their own appeal on the possibility of a rerun. So it's now for the Apex Court, the last court, to rule on this. And we all, await what comes out of this. But in any case, when the Apex Court rules, you can only then appeal to God, because that's the hierarchy of courts. That's the final destination. And the process, will have been concluded in that regard. But we would like to see in the future further reforms in our electoral framework, and also a situation whereby the people are the ones that determine the outcome of elections, not that there will be this gale of litigations that we are witnessing.
All right, great breakdown. Now, the PDP and Atiku Abubakar, as well as Labour Party and Mr. P2B, have taken on their constitutional right to appeal a judgment which they feel does not, and based on their prayers, is not, should be reviewed. And they've taken this on to the Supreme Court. In the next few days, we'll have this served to their respondents, and then they have an opportunity to argue their case before the Supreme Court, led by the Chief Justice of Nigeria. Again, as we've mentioned, it would play out, and the onus is on us. We cannot comment on the details of the case because that's the responsibility of the judges. However, as as important and driven the first leg of this particular appeal was, we believe that Nigerians would be expecting a proper documentation of this case, and of course, the Supreme Court to look into the prayers of the two parties, in this case, the PDP and Atiku Abubakar, and of course, the APC and Mr. Peter Obi. I believe it will be an interesting next few days. But the next steps for this is that within the next 10 days, it will be filed, the respondents will be informed, and then following that, the committee will be instituted, and then after that, both parties or the three parties involved, or the parties involved, will have an opportunity to argue their cases, and then of course, the Supreme Court would rule in terms of what will happen. Again, brings us up the conversation on electoral acts, some recommendations that have been made to perhaps strengthen the institution and perhaps integrity of elections in Nigeria so that we don't have to go through this process whilst the president is already, the president is in New York at the moment whilst he's being served, as whether him being president is legitimate or not. So a number of things to look at, but our focus right now will definitely be on this particular case and how the Supreme Court will review and perhaps move away or sustain the judgment of the appeal court.